Imagine planning the most aggressive, heavily armed neighborhood brawl in human history. You show up with over 34,000 of your toughest friends, armed to the teeth. You bring battleships, aircraft carriers, and enough explosives to level a small mountain range. You kick down the front door, screaming a battle cry, ready for the fight of your life. And then you realize the house is completely empty. The guys you came to fight packed up their bags and moved out 3 weeks ago. But somehow, before the night is over, you and your friends manage to suffer over 300 casualties. Your multi-million-dollar warship gets blown to pieces, and the only enemy combatant you actually encounter is a stray dog. This isn't a sketch from a comedy show. This actually happened. Welcome to Operation Cottage, the World War II battle where nobody showed up, but everyone still managed to lose. To understand how a modern military could successfully attack a ghost town and still get its butt kicked, we have to travel to the Aleutian Islands in 1943. Picture a string of frozen, miserable rocks stretching out from Alaska towards Russia. The weather here is less winter wonderland and more hostile alien planet. The fog is so thick you can practically chew it, and the freezing rain never stops. The Japanese military had occupied a couple of these islands, specifically Attu and Kiska, mostly to be an annoying thorn in America's side. The United States, naturally, did not love having a hostile army parked on American soil. So, they decided to evict them. First up was the island of Attu. That eviction notice was delivered with extreme prejudice, and the battle was an absolute meat grinder. The Japanese defenders fought to the bitter end, culminating in a massive, terrifying banzai charge. The American military planners looked at the staggering body count from Attu, wiped the sweat from their foreheads, and turned their paranoid eyes to the next target. Kiska. Kiska was supposed to be even worse. Intelligence estimated there were roughly 5,000 hardened Japanese troops dug into an elaborate network of underground tunnels and bunkers. The Allied forces were not taking any chances this time. They assembled a massive invasion force of 34,426 American and Canadian troops. They even brought in the 1st Special Service Force. These guys were an elite unit of commandos trained to parachute into Norway and blow up heavy water dams, or ski through the Alps behind enemy lines. This was meant to be their big combat debut. The invasion date was set for August 15, 1943. The plan was simple: bomb the island back to the Stone Age, storm the beaches, and prepare for a brutal, inch-by-inch fight to the death. But there was a tiny, hilariously massive problem. The Japanese high command had already looked at the bloodbath on Attu and said, "Yeah, absolutely not. We are out of here. Enter Operation KE." This was the Japanese plan to pull a fast one and sneak their entire garrison off the island. Now, you might be wondering how you hide an evacuation of 5,000 people from the most powerful navy on Earth, which is currently surrounding your island. The answer is simple: you let the weather do the work. On July 28th, nearly 3 weeks before the Allied invasion, a massive blanket of dense fog rolled over Kiska. It was the kind of pea soup fog that makes your own hands invisible. Admiral Kimura dashed a fleet of Japanese cruisers into the harbor, and in less than an hour, they vacuumed up all 5,200 soldiers like they were doing a supermarket sweep. They packed onto the ships and vanished into the mist. It was a brilliant, masterfully executed retreat. It was basically Homer Simpson backing into the bushes, but with an entire army. But the Japanese didn't just casually stroll away. They were incredibly meticulous, and they wanted to leave a little prank behind. They spent their final days carving logs to look like heavy artillery, painting them, and aiming them at the sky. They left fake radio transmitters broadcasting nonsense to make it sound like people were still there. They created a massive haunted movie set, knowing perfectly well the Allies would fall for it. Oh, and they also left behind a generous scattering of explosive booby traps and naval mines, just for good measure. And the wildest part, American intelligence actually intercepted a decoded Japanese message hinting that the Kiska garrison had evacuated. The brilliant codebreakers who had essentially won the Battle of Midway somehow fumbled the bag here. A traffic analyst in Hawaii misread the intercept, assuming they meant the garrison was being moved to a different location on the island, not abandoning it entirely. So the warning was completely ignored. For the next 3 weeks, the Allies proceeded to absolutely hammer Kiska. They dropped roughly 1,200 tons of bombs and fired thousands of artillery shells from the ocean. They spent millions of dollars blowing up rocks, empty trenches, and decorative wooden logs. And then, D-Day arrived. August 15th. The Allied landing craft hit the beaches. The elite commandos of the 1st Special Service Force paddled the shore silently in tiny rubber boats, creeping through the freezing mist, knives out, ready to snap necks. Behind them, the rest of the 34,000 heavily armed men began creeping inland. The fog was so dense, you couldn't tell if the guy next to you was your squad mate or a bush. Everyone was absolutely terrified, expecting a screaming Japanese soldier to jump out of the mist at any second. Nerves were fried. Fingers were twitching on triggers. Suddenly, a shape moved in the fog. Someone yelled. A shot rang out. And then all hell broke loose. For 6 straight hours, a furious, intense gun battle raged across the foggy tundra. Machine guns chattered, rifles cracked, and men dived for cover. The United States 87th Mountain Infantry Regiment and the Canadian 13th Brigade were locked in a desperate fight for survival. The only problem is, they were fighting each other. Because the fog was so thick, The Americans and the Canadians had stumbled into each other's lines and completely panicked. A Canadian soldier reportedly saw what he thought were Japanese troops and opened fire, triggering a massive tragic chain reaction. By the time the fog finally lifted and everyone realized they were shooting at guys wearing the same uniforms, the damage was done. In that single friendly fire incident alone, 28 men were dead, and 50 were wounded. But the island wasn't done exacting its toll. Remember those parting gifts the Japanese left behind? 3 days after the invasion, on August 18th, the United States Navy destroyer USS Abner Red was patrolling Kiska Harbor. It struck a forgotten Japanese naval mine that had been planted before the evacuation. The massive explosion ripped through the ship, killing 71 sailors and wounding 47. It was the deadliest single event of the entire operation, all caused by an enemy who was already sitting comfortably hundreds of miles away. And if the friendly fire and the sea mines weren't bad enough, the climate was actively trying to kill them. The constant freezing rain soaked everything. The Canadian troops, who you would assume are practically born immune to the cold, were actually suffering terribly. Their uniforms were completely wrong for the wet maritime chill of the Aleutians. The fabric literally began to dissolve and rot off their bodies in the dampness, forcing them to run patrols and patch together American gear. Hundreds of men were medically evacuated because their feet were swelling and turning black from trench foot and frostbite. Oh, and the farce had a sequel. There was a nearby island called Little Kiska, which had housed a Japanese midget submarine base. American troops launched a simultaneous daring raid on that island too. They stormed the base, adrenaline pumping, only to find absolutely nothing but some empty bottles and a forgotten diary. After about 8 days of securing an island that was already completely secure, the final butcher's bill was tallied. The Allies suffered 313 casualties in the landing forces, consisting of 92 killed or dead from wounds and 221 wounded or missing. Add the 71 dead and 47 wounded from the USS Abner Reed, and the numbers become staggering. Over 300 casualties. 0 enemy combatants. The cost of this entire operation was astronomically disproportionate to what was achieved. Adjusted for inflation, Operation Cottage cost the equivalent of over $2 billion today. The fleet burned enough fuel to have powered the D-Day landings in Normandy, all for a rock that nobody wanted anymore. Oh, and remember that single enemy combatant I mentioned at the very beginning? While scouring the empty island, the invading force stumbled across a medium-sized dog. It was a pet that the Japanese troops had left behind. Allied soldiers, probably relieved to find anything with a pulse that wasn't shooting at them, tried to adopt the dog. But the dog, displaying more hostility than the entire Japanese army that month, bit a soldier. The troops immediately shot it. It was the sole hostile creature taken down on the entire island. It was a tragic, ridiculous end to a deeply embarrassing chapter of military history. The Battle of Kiska was quickly mocked by the press, with Life magazine publishing a sarcastic article titled, "The Battle That Wasn't." It became the ultimate textbook example of the sunk cost fallacy and the terrifying reality of the fog of war. So the next time you feel stupid because you showed up to a party a day early, take a deep breath. At least you didn't bring 34,000 friends, blow up a destroyer, and lose a firefight against your own shadow. But speaking of armies making colossally stupid mistakes, you are not going to believe what happens when a modern military tries to fight a war against a flock of literal, flightless birds. Trust me, it only gets weirder from here, so stick around for the Great Emu War.